Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
She was 37 years old. She had two sons. One was 6, one was 10. She weighed barely 100 pounds. And on the morning of June 19th, 1953, the United States government strapped her into an electric chair in the death chamber at Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York. The current was applied. Julius Rosenberg died quickly. Ethel did not. The current was applied a second time. A prison physician stepped forward to check. She was still alive. A third application, still alive. A fourth jolt of electricity had to be administered before Ethel Rosenberg was finally pronounced dead. Witnesses in the room reported that smoke rose from her head. What the witnesses did not know, what the American public did not know, was that the FBI director had written in his own files 2 years earlier that the case against Ethel was weak, that prosecutors admitted among themselves her guilt was uncertain, that her inclusion in the indictment was not primarily about justice, it was about pressure. She was on trial not because the evidence demanded it, but because her husband might break if he thought his wife was going to die. He never broke. She died anyway. The date is April 5th, 1951. The place is a federal courtroom in Lower Manhattan. What happens in the next few minutes will haunt American justice for the next 70 years. And it begins with a judge picking up a piece of paper and reading out a sentence the government's own files suggest was built, at least in part, on a lie. This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. Most people who recognize the Rosenberg name think they already know this story. 2 communist spies, Manhattan, the atomic bomb, the Cold War, executed, end of story. What I find so remarkable about April 5th, 1951, the day Judge Irving Kaufman sentenced Julius and Ethel Rosenberg to death, is that almost everything most Americans believe about this case is either incomplete or flatly wrong. And the piece that gets quietly set aside isn't a minor detail. It's the moral center of the entire episode. Here is what the evidence tells us. Julius Rosenberg was a confirmed Soviet spy. That part of the government's case was true, but Ethel Rosenberg was almost certainly not. Everyone involved in the prosecution had serious internal doubts about her guilt before the trial ever started. What April 5th, 1951 comes down to is what happens when a government decides that winning matters more than being right, when fear becomes the operating system of a justice system, and when the machinery of the law is used not to find the truth, but to manufacture a particular outcome. Understanding what happened requires holding more than one truth at once, and that's exactly what this story demands. Let me build the clock for you because the timeline matters. In February of 1950, British physicist Klaus Fuchs was arrested in London and confessed to passing atomic bomb secrets to the Soviets while working on the Manhattan Project during World War II. His confession unraveled what turned out to be a significant espionage network. Fuchs identified a courier named Harry Gold. Gold identified an Army soldier named David Greenglass, who had worked at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico, the heart of the American nuclear weapons program. And Greenglass pointed investigators toward his sister and brother-in-law, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, who lived in a cramped apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Julius Rosenberg was arrested in July 1950. Ethel was arrested in August. And here is where the story becomes deeply and uncomfortably complicated, because both things are simultaneously true. Julius Rosenberg was, by any serious historical measure, a real Soviet intelligence asset. The Venona intercepts, classified NSA documents that were declassified in the 1990s, confirm he ran a network, recruited sources from inside American defense industries and government agencies, and funneled military and technical intelligence to Moscow from the mid-1940s through 1950. He was committed, ideologically motivated, and effective. The fundamental charge against him was correct. Ethel Rosenberg almost certainly was not a spy. Historians who've worked through the declassified intelligence files, Soviet and American, largely agree on this. She was aware of her husband's activities. She believed in the same political causes he believed in. But active participation in the espionage operation, the evidence for that was thin at best, and the people prosecuting her knew it. An FBI memo written before the trial states plainly that the case against Ethel was not too strong. Miles Lane, a member of the prosecution team, said she needed to be convicted and given a stiff sentence not because the evidence demanded it, but because, his words, it was very important for strategic reasons. And J. Edgar Hoover, in his own files, was explicit. Proceeding against the wife will serve as a lever to make Julius talk. That's the true nature of April 5th, 1951. It's the day the government made official an arrangement it had been building for months. Use Ethel's life as a bargaining chip. Sentence her to die alongside her husband. Wait for him to break. He'd give up names, give up the network, save himself and his wife in the process. Julius never gave them anything, and rather than acknowledge that the strategy had failed, the government executed them both. But there's another layer here that I think gets almost no attention, and it goes to the heart of how the case was constructed in the first place. The government star witness against Ethel was her own brother. David Greenglass had worked at Los Alamos. He was guilty of passing classified information to Julius Rosenberg. That much was not in dispute. He was facing decades in federal prison, and his wife Ruth was also implicated in the conspiracy. They had young children. The government came to David Greenglass with a deal. His original testimony placed the exchange of atomic data on a Manhattan street corner, involving only Julius. In his new version, offered just 10 days before the trial began, Ethel was suddenly present at apartment meetings, typing Julius's notes, serving as an active participant in the spy ring. What changed? His wife Ruth was permitted to remain free with their children. That was the deal. In exchange for reframing his memory of his own sister, in exchange for testimony that would place Ethel inside the conspiracy, Ruth walked. David got 15 years instead of a likely death sentence, and Ethel got the electric chair. In 2001, at the age of 78, David Greenglass sat down for a New York Times interview and admitted he had lied on the stand. "I don't remember that she typed anything," he said. His sister had been dead for 48 years. Picture this. It's April 5th, 1951. Judge Irving Kaufman settles into his chair in the Southern District of New York, turns to the two defendants, and prepares to read a sentence he has privately. And against every rule of judicial ethics, already discussed with the prosecution, with Department of Justice officials, and with other federal judges, he will tell the court he reached his decision alone. He didn't. Kaufman's words from the bench that day are worth sitting with. He told the Rosenbergs, "I consider your crimes worse than murder." He blamed them personally for the Korean War, for the 50,000 American casualties already recorded in that conflict. He said their betrayal had put the atomic bomb in Soviet hands, years before our best scientists predicted Russia would perfect the bomb. He sentenced them to death, and he described it as a solemn and sacred duty. Here's what troubles me about Kaufman's performance that day. I don't think he believed he was doing something wrong. That's the part I keep coming back to. He believed the threat was existential. He believed showing weakness would cost American lives. He believed Julius Rosenberg, and by extension Ethel, deserved to die, and he was going to make the law produce that result, regardless of what the strict evidentiary record required. He was a man who had decided the outcome in advance and then built the process around it. And inside the atmosphere of 1951, the Red Scare at full boil, McCarthy on the rise, Korea bleeding, no one with the power to stop it was willing to do so. I find myself thinking about the children. Michael Rosenberg was 10 years old when his parents were sentenced. Robert was 6. They wrote letters to President Eisenhower. Eisenhower turned down the request twice. Once from Truman's Justice Department, once from a direct appeal from the boys. Pope Pius XII wrote to Eisenhower as well. Einstein wrote, Picasso called it a crime against humanity. Protests erupted in Paris, London, Rome, the Pope and Picasso and Albert Einstein on the same side of an issue. And still, it made no difference. What that tells you is something telling about how fear works inside institutions. Once a decision has been made at that level, with that much official weight behind it, the system's immune response is to protect the decision, not re-examine it. Every appeal the Rosenbergs filed was denied. 7 separate times they went to federal courts. The American Civil Liberties Union reviewed the proceedings and found no civil liberties violations. The Supreme Court denied certiorari. When Justice William O. Douglas issued a last-minute stay of execution, the full court was recalled from summer recess specifically to overturn it, and voted 6-3 to lift the stay and allow the executions to proceed. The machinery moved in one direction, and nothing was going to stop it. There's one more piece of this I want to make sure we don't skip past, because it goes to the heart of what the Rosenberg case was fundamentally about. The government's central claim, the one Judge Kaufman built his death sentence around, was that Julius Rosenberg had handed the Soviet Union the secret of the atomic bomb, that this act of treason had put the A-bomb in Stalin's hands years ahead of schedule, that it had directly enabled Soviet aggression in Korea, that the Rosenbergs had, in Kaufman's words, caused the deaths of tens of thousands of Americans. None of that was true. The intelligence Julius Rosenberg passed to the Soviets came primarily through David Greenglass, an army machinist, not a physicist. Greenglass did not have a deep understanding of nuclear physics. The information he could provide was incomplete, imprecise, and based on what a non-specialist could observe and remember from working at Los Alamos. Physicists and historians who've reviewed the material generally conclude it was of limited value. Soviet nuclear scientists, led by Igor Kurchatov, were fully capable of developing their own bomb on their own timeline. Klaus Fuchs, the trained physicist, the man who fully grasped what he was passing, contributed far more to the Soviet program than anything Rosenberg ever sent. The secret of the atomic bomb that justified 2 executions wasn't a secret at all. The person the government described as the kingpin of a vast espionage conspiracy was running a confirmed but far more limited operation than Kaufman described. and the woman who was sentenced to die as the mastermind's essential partner was almost certainly not a spy at all. What the government had in the end was a real spy who wouldn't talk, a fabricated case against his wife built on his brother-in-law's revised testimony, a judge who'd made up his mind before the trial ended, and a political atmosphere in which no one with authority was willing to pump the brakes. That combination, proven guilt on one side, manufactured guilt on the other, institutional momentum, and an atmosphere of fear that made scrutiny feel like disloyalty, produced 2 deaths, 2 orphaned children, and a legal record that American courts have technically upheld ever since. We're still living with the consequences of April 5, 1951. Not in some distant, abstract way, in a very specific one. The Rosenberg case established something. It established that when national security is the justification, the normal rules of evidence can bend. That witness testimony can be shaped through prosecutorial negotiation. That a defendant can be charged and sentenced not because the evidence demands it, but because their presence in the dock is useful to the government's larger strategy, and that the courts, moving inside the same atmosphere of fear that produced the prosecution, will tend to defer. That template didn't retire when Julius and Ethel died. It has been cited, consciously or not, in the handling of cases involving national security ever since. The pattern: we know things we cannot say publicly, the threat is real, trust us, the outcome is necessary, has a long American history that runs through Sing Sing and well beyond it. The philosopher Hannah Arendt wrote about what she called the banality of evil, the way ordinary people operating inside ordinary institutional structures produce morally monstrous outcomes without ever experiencing themselves as doing anything wrong. She was writing about something specific and extreme. But every time I read about Judge Kaufman privately consulting with prosecutors before announcing his independent sentence, or about the FBI's strategic decision to use an almost certainly innocent woman as a lever, I think about that phrase. These were not cartoonish villains. They were lawyers and judges and bureaucrats who believed the threat was real, believed the ends justified the means, and went home to their families afterward without losing a night's sleep. Ethel Rosenberg's sons, Michael and Robert Mirapol, who took the last name of the family that adopted them after their parents' deaths, have spent the better part of their adult lives seeking an official acknowledgement of what the historical record now shows. Not a pardon. A pardon implies guilt, an exoneration, a formal presidential proclamation stating that their mother was wrongly convicted and executed by the government of the United States. As of today, no president has issued one. So what do we hold on to from April 5, 1951? Julius Rosenberg was a spy. That's true. Ethel Rosenberg was almost certainly innocent of the charges that sent her to the electric chair. That's also true. The government that prosecuted her knew its case was shaky and used it anyway. That's true. Every court in America reviewed the proceedings and let the verdict stand. Also true. The testimony that placed Ethel inside the conspiracy was fabricated, and the man who fabricated it admitted it 50 years later. True. And 2 small boys lost both parents to a political calculation that was dressed up very carefully as justice. All of it is true. None of it cancels the rest. What I respect about moments like this one, as uncomfortable as they are to sit with, is that they force us to ask what we mean precisely when we say the system worked. The Rosenberg trial was legal. The appeals were denied on legitimate procedural grounds. The executions were carried out according to the law. And yet, the government executed a woman its own internal files suggest was innocent, using testimony it knew had been shaped by prosecutorial pressure in service of a strategic goal, breaking Julius, that was never achieved. That's not a comforting lesson, but it may be the harder kind to forget. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, let me leave you with a few things to sit with. If the government can sentence someone it privately doubts is guilty, as a tactical lever to break someone else, what does that say about the boundary between national security and due process? If a court can review a case built on testimony the witness later admitted he fabricated and still affirmed the verdict, what is the difference between a legal outcome and a just one? And 70 years later, two elderly men are still waiting for their government to say out loud what its own declassified files already show. What does it cost a country to admit it was wrong? Because that's what the Rosenberg case teaches us. Not just about the Cold War and the Red Scare, but about what fear does to institutions and what institutions do to people when the normal safeguards are suspended in the name of necessity. Thank you for your time. If this episode made you think, I'd be grateful if you take 30 seconds to leave a comment or drop a quick rating wherever you're listening. It makes a measurable difference in how the platform surfaces the show to new listeners, and it helps us grow. If you enjoyed it, tell a friend. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.